But let me start at a high level first. So much of what we do as email marketers really depends on recipient domains. And you're looking at, right, the big four kind of here, if we lump Hotmail into Outlook. It's likely that these comprise a great majority of your email list, unless, for example, you're B2B or you have some other sort of niche focus. But really, a lot of what you do, and if your mandate is really to grow revenue and use your email list as an asset to build the revenue of the company, a lot of what you do really depends on how these folks, and you can add Comcast or Verizon or whatever other providers you want to this list. Really depends on what those folks think of you and what their opinion is of the the emails that you're sending. So let's take this step by step. So if you really want to knock this out of the park, right, so in terms of email marketing, what you need to do is deliver, all of the things that you're measured on, your metrics, your opens and clicks, if you're looking at sort of per campaign metrics, conversions, and ultimately revenue, right, is what we all care about with regard to this. But of course, it all depends on how those recipient domains think of your email. And if you think about it, those recipient domains have a variety of ways in which they're judging you. Could be looking at the actual content that you're sending. Could be your sending infrastructure, is it properly authenticated? But when you look at it, and we spend a lot of time thinking about this, most of how they're going to judge you is really who you're sending to and whether those folks want to receive your mail and whether, in fact, those folks are real people. So when you think about the list that you're sending to, it's both your biggest asset and it's a huge risk, because the quality of your list is going to affect how your email is received at those domains and therefore how your business is going to be able to grow revenue. And so a big focus for you ought to be really making sure that all the bad stuff, right, the bouncing emails, the potential spam traps, folks who don't want to engage with you, maybe those folks who will complain, convert those, get those off your list, or, turn, for example, the complainers into unsubscribe so it wouldn't negatively impact your reputation. Things like that are going to be what you should be focused on in terms of driving email marketing success. So that's going to really be the focus or the goal of today's discussion, and I look forward to hearing your questions about that. But let's dig into this a little bit deeper. So I've said that, right, you want to spend a lot of time focusing on the cleanliness of your list, of your email addresses. What does that mean? We hear a lot about list cleaning or cleanliness in the email space. And just a couple of screenshots there of, like, for example, from ExactTarget or Salesforce Marketing Cloud. They have a few features, right, in their ESP solution that help marketers manage their data quality. And of course, if you're using an ESP, they're going to be doing things like removing your unsubscribes, removing your complaints, removing hard bounces. They'll likely do that after the first hard bounce. You may have some rules built around soft bounces and how many of those you'll accept. Inactive subscribers, again, you may have some business rules or logic around that, depending on the seasonality of your own buying cycle. You could say every, if we go 3 months and we haven't seen an open and a click from this subscriber, we'll put them on a win-back campaign and drop them, after another couple weeks or something. And then every time you have incoming data to your ESP, of course, that ESP will have a global suppression file based on their own experience sending across clients, and they'll say, gosh, I really don't like this address. You can't, they'll mark it as probably as unsubscribed by default or something like that, and you'll wonder, what happened to that address? Well, the ESP has had a bad experience with that in the past, and so they're going to remove it from your file. These are all really important steps that you ought to be taking that, if you're not, it's probably a problem, and you probably ought to start there. But really, that's not, I think, what we ultimately mean at FreshAddress when we talk about data quality and the health of your file. And there are a few reasons for that. I'll get into that. But really, what we're looking for is kind of getting outside of your own data set. There are a number of ways in which all the steps I was just outlining are kind of limited by the incoming data that you have, by your own sending cadence, by your own bounce processing systems. Each of those things, for example, requires that you be sending on a certain frequency and that you're handling things in a certain way, and it would be, wrong to think that you have perfect view of all of your recipients. And so what I'm going to suggest is that take this concept that I'm going to call email protection, and really what I mean here is kind of getting outside of your own perspective. And I'll explain what that means, but really at a high level, it means just taking more global view of the email addresses and recipients that are on your file and kind of applying more of a forensic method to say, is this a legitimate email address? Do we have problems with this? Is this something we ought to remove from our file? Not just based on your own, hey, I got a bounce from this, or I got a soft bounce, or I got some interaction, but more, globally across brands and across the, the MX behavior of the domain and various other things that, honestly, you probably don't have the time to dig into. What's the behavior of that email address, and how should we characterize it from is this good for me or bad for me ultimately when I'm thinking about my sending reputation? So I'll explain what I mean by that. Here are a couple of examples of how it contrasts sort of the base email hygiene, right, that you may already be doing through the various processes that your email service provider has or that you may have in place versus a more expanded look at email protection or email hygiene. So on the left, you're obviously handling complaints, right? People that click, this is spam, those are going to be taken off your file because they're provided as part of a feedback loop, for example, from your recipient domain. But a more expanded view of that email protection might provide is to say, well, they might flag certain recipients as frequent complainers, folks who really, just in general, don't like promotional marketing emails. And so it might allow you to pay closer attention to those or look at them before they become a problem for you. As you may know, there are certain thresholds with regard to spam or abuse complaints at the various ISPs, and so you want to be careful and sort of be watching that ahead of time. Similarly for bounces, you obviously don't know if an email address is bouncing until you actually send to it and you get that disposition back from the the mail server at the domain. What an email protection program or solution could provide is the information on bounces before they're going to happen, before they may impact your sending reputation. This is particularly important, for example, if you think that you've got say a historical data set and you're not really clear on what may be bouncing and what may be active in receiving mail at those domains. And for those larger data sets where those bounces would really impact negatively your sending reputation, that's where an email protection solution can really help. I spoke briefly about ESP suppressions. That's a fairly common thing across all ESPs. I don't think you'll talk to an ESP who, will say, yeah, we'll send to literally every email address that you load to our system, because that would be, detrimental to them, especially in a shared IP or infrastructure environment. But an email protection program would take a more broad look at suppressions. And if, ESPs build those suppression files really based on their own sending experience and sort of, sharing between themselves, but it's not their core function to spend time on, email hygiene. The ESP space is very, active. There's been a lot of growth and, innovation in this space. And so ESPs are really focused on core features that they provide to their users, improving their workflow, giving you reasons to come back to them again and again with new features. What they're less focused on is really the, going the extra step with regard to that data quality in terms of, it really digging into what SPAMTRAP signatures look like and addressing other potential, negative addresses and things like that. And then the last point I'd make, just with regard to sort of base email hygiene versus an improved or more dramatic email protection program, is all of the steps sort of on the left side of the screen here are really aimed at removal. You're going to take away those bad email addresses. You may mark them as unsubscribed or whatever, just so you don't send them to them again. But of course, you will know that any email address, any potential connection that you have with a customer is worth something to your business. It has business value. And so losing that opportunity is a loss of business value for you, and so it's in your best interest to, when you can, improve or correct those issues when you can. So just a brief example of what that might mean is, instead of removing the email address that, has a misspelled domain, for example, this is the simplest example, so gmail.com instead of gmail.com. You might remove that, or you might just correct that and, see if that person wants to, register that address with you as it's corrected. And that's an example, is a simple example of just a connection that you can maintain with that and grow that relationship with that subscriber and keep that business value versus just after the fact sort of, oh, whoops, I guess we have a wrong domain, let's just junk it, that sort of thing. I hope that makes clear kind of conceptually what I mean by email protection versus a base level of email hygiene. So I've used the term spam trap a couple times here, so I just want to define what that is for those folks who may not know, because we live this world all the time, so I don't want to assume that other folks are, paying as close attention to these details as we are. A spam trap is really an email address that's deliverable, meaning you wouldn't get a bounce from it, and it's used to identify spammers. The way these are set up, it's not intended that they're going to be on any legitimate email marketer's list. They're set up in a variety of different ways. So you might have a email address that previously was, held by a legitimate recipient who did in fact sign up for your email list. And then over the course of time, that person no longer uses that address, so the ISP or the recipient domain then marks that account as, going bad or about to be, uninhabited or something. And so they would produce bounce replies for you, at which point, presumably you would remove it from your file. And then ultimately they may take that over as a recycled spam trap after some period of time, and after they hope that any legitimate marketer maintaining their file would have had it off their list. So those are the more recycled spam traps, and then there are what are sometimes called pristine spam traps. Those are more created, and never signed up for any, email marketing or any other promotions of any kind. And so an indicator, it'd be a strong indicator that, you were a spammer or not a legitimate marketer if you were to send to a pristine spam trap, because the idea is, gosh, those never got out there. We never opted into anything. In the power of the spam trap, and they play a very important role, right, in the email environment, the email ecosystem, because they help sort of remove all the true spammers from the mail stream, meaning that you, as a legitimate email marketer, can get your messaging through. The danger, of course, is when an email marketer who's trying to do the right things ends up with one of these on their file, and then what happens? And the truth is that spam traps, especially those provided by very influential organizations, take Spamhaus or SpamCop as an example, can really hurt your deliverability with the rest of your deployment. Not just the email messaging that you're sending to the spam trap itself, but really anything that you're sending to the domain that uses that spam trap or that spam trap provider as part of its filtering, can severely sort of inhibit your ability to get to your other legitimate subscribers. So just wanted to spend a moment on that. So really, what do I mean then? Let's take an example of what I think an email protection solution might look like. Some of you may be familiar with this already, but the offering that FreshAddress has in this space is called Safe to Send. And I'll spend a couple minutes on this briefly. But the idea is that with Safe to Send, you take an email address or set of email addresses as an input, and you produce as an output a variety of measurements on that list and specific flags for each email address provided to say, yep, this email address is good, you're safe to send to it, or no, you shouldn't send to this email address because it would negatively affect your sending reputation. There's really a three-step process that we follow for that. The first is to check the email address that's provided. And what we do there is to just take a look at the syntax of the email address and see whether it's following the rules for its domain. For example, Gmail doesn't allow underscores in their handles, things like that. Then at the account level, we do check both email address activity that is seen sort of globally, and also actually conduct a real-time check to see if an email sent to that account would be delivered or whether it would bounce. The second step is to correct any issues, and that sort of came up in our previous slide, but the idea is if we see an opportunity to fix something, and you can see a couple of examples here, for example, AOL without a top-level domain, or Gmail with an incorrect top-level domain, or misspelling of Yahoo. The idea is we've sort of reverse engineered a bunch of those issues that are often found, or typos in email addresses, and we can suggest fixes for those. Now, you may be uncomfortable using those suggestions if you're doing this in a historical file or batch process, but if you have an opportunity at the point of sign up to then flash that suggestion back to the the proposed subscriber, then that's an opportunity to maintain that connection that you could then show to them and have them confirm. And then the final step really is to protect, and this is where some of what I was saying about spam traps comes into play. So when you think about list quality and email hygiene and email protection, you may think of just the bouncing email addresses, but of course, spam traps being an example, there are plenty of deliverable email addresses, that is, those that you would actually be able to send email to, that you would never want to send email to. You could put in this category frequent spam complainers, malicious addresses, spam traps on that list, or folks who maybe have registered on the DMA's do not email list, which is something that the DMA maintains, similar to the do not call list. Those are all sorts of addresses that, yep, absolutely, your email will go through, but you may see your deliverability sort of hurt over time in kind of an insidious way, as opposed to an obvious, oh, this was a bouncing email. And then really the last step is to compare your file output, your disposition for those email addresses, give you some benchmarking there so you get a sense for how am I doing, where am I going with my program. That's safe to send, and what we typically recommend to folks is that they take any historical data and conduct a full clean of that if they've really never paid attention to this before, and then for any incoming data sets to integrate safe to send API on their web form, or I guess somewhat less preferred because then you couldn't show those suggestions to folks at point of sign up, but you could also do an automated batch process as you get into incoming data sets depending on your needs.